Welcome everyone to CASAA Live. I feel like it's been a lifetime since we've been here. We did have some time off, but we're here. We're back. We're doing the thing. Alex, are you ready for a show?
I'm ready for the show.
Me too, man. Me too. I'm so excited about our guest today. Alex, I know has some legislation to talk about, which we'll do at the end of the show. Alex will give us a rundown on what's going on as far as things we need to keep our eyes and ears on. But welcome everybody. I see a whole bunch of familiar faces in the chat. Mr. Addy Tooney is here. James, Adrian is here. Janine, welcome. Mark Sliths is with us today. Peggy, welcome. Everybody, welcome. I'm going to do my best during the stream to kind of run the back end as well, you guys. So I'm going to try to star your comments and questions. We'll try to pull them up during chat, stuff like that. So I'm going to kind of do a little double duty here today. Kristen is not with us today. She's off enjoying her weekend. We gave her the day off. So welcome everybody. Let's get into it. If Alex is ready, then we will bring our guest on and get into the meat and potatoes of today's episode.
I will say, for those who are curious about what legislation I'll bring up at the end, Cook County, Illinois, we've got Vermont, Maine, and I believe, Vermont, Maine, Louisiana, and maybe some good sounding news out of South Carolina. So
we have good news today?
A little bit. Depends on
we'll
how
take
you
a
feel
little
about
bit.
it.
We'll
It's
take
one
a
of
little
those.
bit.
It's a little nuanced. So, but other than that, we can get into it.
Awesome. Sounds good. All right. Are you guys ready for we still haven't adjusted the volume on it, super loud bumper? Yeah? All right. Let's do the thing. Welcome, Clive, to CASAA Live. I've been waiting to say that just because it rhymes.
A great pleasure to be here. Great pleasure.
Yes, welcome back. Welcome back. Really quick, before we get into today's topic, I'm sure everybody in chat and most folks who are watching on the replay, again, welcome, replay crew. Sorry I didn't say hi to you at the beginning. Who you are, what you do, real brief kind of rundown about your existence here, and then we'll get right into this.
Well, I've been in the tobacco harm reduction space since about 1998, when I was originally I started as Director of Action on Smoking and Health in the UK in 1997, and I was basically a tobacco control activist. Then till about 2003, then I left and became a civil servant. Working for the British government, for Tony Blair, for the UN in Sudan, and a few other things. And then came back, set up my own consultancy in sustainability and public health, which, I used to make a living. But I also spend quite a lot of time on the tobacco harm reduction brief, because I had hoped when I was the director of ASH that I would never return to this field, because it would all sort of sort itself out and, sort of could pursue other interests. But man, it is so infuriating. I cannot leave it alone. There is a enormous public health win waiting to be taken. Potentially hundreds of millions of lives in play if you take the projections of the number of people worldwide who would die from smoking over the next century. And for some reason, all the people who are in favor of who should be in favor of doing the right thing are very aggressively doing the wrong thing. And I have to say, it is totally exasperating. So I've sort of dedicated myself to this cause. I make money here and there. I get some support from philanthropy. I don't take money from tobacco or vaping companies. I sort of make my way through all of this. But it's a cause, and I'm sort of locked on, really. Feel very strongly about it. Feel very strongly about all the terrible things that are being done to vapors and vaping businesses in the United States. But taking it to another level, there's what the WHO gets up to worldwide. So these things very much on my mind. I'm very proud in some ways of what we've achieved in the United Kingdom. We have a very solid consensus around tobacco harm reduction from the activist groups, consumer groups, academics, not all of them, of course, there's some crazies as well, but for the most part, the sensible people all basically agree. Our equivalent of the FDA and the CDC are basically on side. And I think we're making real progress, and hopefully we'll be an example to the world over the next 5 or 10 years or so.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm just so happy that you're infuriated this much to stick around in this field, because
Oh my God,
folks like you are just, a necessity. A necessity in all of this.
But just the energy for all of this comes from the consumers and the small businesses, in my opinion. That's whenever we win anything, it's because of them.
It's 100% true.
Well, as as much as I appreciate that confidence, we are still very much aware that there are much larger forces at play here, and I wish that I could point to New York's state budget this year. Actually, they completely eliminated the section that would have banned menthol and flavors in smoke-free products, regardless of what FDA authorized. And I do know that I believe one of the incumbent tobacco companies has a very powerful lobbyist in Albany. But we did, of course, I think at some point in March, we were able to mobilize our members in New York and get a bunch of messages sent opposing that. So thanks for everybody who participated. And it's not, we're not the silver bullet, but it does matter. So, thank you for.
And a big thing, we can't say it enough that, when we talk about CASAA, it's not just Alex, myself, Kristen, Jim, the board. CASAA is you guys. CASAA is all of us. CASAA is 250,000 plus members across this country who together we accomplish these things. Or like Alex said, maybe we're not the silver bullet, but we carry a lot of weight together. We do that together. CASAA is all of us.
I mean, I'll tell you my experience of this. The thing that breaks through with politicians, it doesn't always, but it should. They never get, not by listening to me going on about odds ratios or showing graphs or cohort studies or anything like that. Nobody's convinced by that. There's a location in the political brain that is tuned to, less so in some American politicians, but tuned to empathy, tuned to understanding how the world works through human experience, essentially. And it's that part of the political brain that gets ignited by the simple device of vapors telling their story in an authentic, genuine, and original way. And the thing that groups like CASAA do, and we've got the New Nicotine Alliance in the UK does the same thing. They create the conditions in which you can do that effectively. But in the end, the payload is your story. It's your experience and the way that vaping or whatever actually has affected you for the better and how you feel about it. That cuts through. Almost nothing else does, in my opinion. It's really difficult. And we had an epic victory, and probably the only one in the European Parliament in 2013, when the European Commission, the member states, everybody, all the activists, all the tobacco control activists, they all wanted to regulate e-cigarettes as medicines. So we're back at in the early stages of these arguments about what these products are. Would have been a total disaster, without any doubt. And the thing that swung it was thousands, I mean thousands, of vapors from every member state in the EU, in every language, telling their stories, and the sort of wash of authentic testimony was just impossible to ignore in the European Parliament, and it turned it around. And it was an amazing thing, an amazing victory. People like me played a role by saying, well, this is the crazy thing they're about to do, and this is who you should write to. And by the way, do it in the next 10 days. And that's kind of what CASAA does. Provides the intel that allows an individual to be an effective political operator. And that's an invaluable service. And if you're listening, get your hand in your pocket and send them some money because it's really important. End of commercial.
Yeah.
But you're
Well,
right.
I'll jump in here and get things moving along, because this is a pretty good setup for ultimately what we're getting into, which is it's sort of a what's next in all of this. And I think to some extent we're kind of pre-gaming this a little bit. We spend a lot of time focusing on specific policies that are restricting access and making these products less attractive and less accessible. There is certainly, we're not an anti-regulation type of community here. We realize that there needs to be something, but we need to find a balance. And a lot of this deals with the harm associated with smoking cigarettes and reducing that harm. But what we've seen from the opponents in this debate is moving the goalpost and making this all about nicotine. And so specifically, we are referencing an article that you wrote in April, which was Beyond Tobacco Harm Reduction. So probably you're the best person to do this. We've got the author here. Briefly, could you kind of set the table for what this article is about and how we can get into this?
All right. So tobacco harm reduction it's an awful clunky phrase, by the way. I mean, I absolutely hate it. But it's a useful concept in public health terms. It basically captures the value in public health terms, of somebody switching from a high risk product to a low risk product when they wish to use nicotine and continue using nicotine. Okay. And it's useful, and it's got a lot of people in the public health community excited about it. Okay. But that doesn't mean that is what the product is or is there for. And the danger is, if you only allow it to be that, what is the value of these products, or what status do these products have when actually people have quit smoking? Or there's a generation coming up who've never smoked and don't care to smoke. I'll give you an example of this. We've seen an incredibly dramatic decline, and I'm not going to mention the US numbers, in smoking amongst young women aged 16 to 24 in Norway. Okay, it's gone from like 17% smoking in that age group down to 1%, almost gone. But snus use has gone up. Okay, and it's gone up to almost 15%. So essentially, in round numbers, one type of nicotine use has displaced another. But there's no smoking anymore, so you can't use an argument. You can kind of use an argument, say, well, in the absence of snus, they would have otherwise smoked. But no one in that age cohort is smoking, and they will never smoke. As they age, they will never smoke, and it's the same with the high school and middle school kids in the United States. They will never smoke. None of them will die of smoking related diseases, because the few that do smoke now, and it is like I forget the numbers, Alex, but it's like 1% or something like that, depending on how you measure it. Even if they manage to continue smoking through young adulthood, most of them will switch to vaping before they're 40, or will quit completely. And then the epidemic of smoking related disease for that age cohort is over. So you say, well, okay, what is this for? And I think we have to go back to basics and say people are using nicotine because they like it, because in the same way that they like other stimulants and other drugs. And we have to reconceptualize it. I know this sounds obvious when you say it. We have to properly reconceptualize it as a recreational stimulant that people like and get something from. Now, there's a debate about what people do get from it, but it's pretty clear they do get something from it, or there wouldn't be 1 billion people using it worldwide, and smoking rates wouldn't have been around 80% at some point in some countries just in the immediate post-war period. So something is happening there, and what we've got is a bunch of science that says, well, people people like it. Hedonistic value. It actually feels good to use it. Shocking. Drug makes people feel good. How shocked should we be by that?
Revolutionary.
It's like sort of universal truth about good. It may not be good for them, but it doesn't mean it doesn't feel good. And then you've got a whole bunch of functional benefits that people talk about, and you'll know more about this than me. But people say it helps calm them, modulates mood, makes them feel less stressed and anxious, helps them concentrate, improves memory and various cognitive sort of functions and everything. So if some of that is true, sorry, and others would say, well, if you've got something like ADHD, and maybe a lot of people have it diagnosed, and some people have some of it undiagnosed, then maybe it has a sort of therapeutic effect on that as well. So maybe there are perfectly good reasons, hedonistic and functional, why people choose to use nicotine. Maybe not everybody. I must admit, I've never used nicotine at all. I don't particularly want to. I'm not really interested in it. I'm probably not one of those that would benefit from it. Who knows? But maybe there's a group, maybe around 30%. That was the number one neuroscientist quoted to me, said that actually works for them in some way. Okay. So why don't we reconceptualize nicotine or rethink nicotine as a popular recreational stimulant that people like and wish to use? And therefore the challenge is to make it available through some sort of legitimate commerce that doesn't drive it underground and push it into some war on drugs sort of black market where everything goes wrong and everything goes bad. And as a drug, if you put it in the great hierarchy of narcotics, it must be among one of the most benign. I mean, people don't lose their minds over it. They don't lose their jobs over it. They don't start fights. They don't have road accidents. Well, not unless they're distracted in some way. They don't. They're not. It's not causing domestic violence. It's not leading people to lose all control and become vulnerable, or leaving people incapable of working or anything. So in terms of a drug, it's pretty benign. Whether it has some health effects, probably, but then so does everything else. The question is this drug, can you make this drug available within the normal risk appetite that we have in society? Not this stupid thing that you hear from the antis, like it's not safe. Nothing's safe. Not even their favorite drugs are safe. If you take varenicline or something, there's a list of potential side effects, some of which are extremely serious. As long as you're armed, it's still counted as safe and effective in the mythology of tobacco control and pharmaceutical regulation. So nothing is ever totally safe. The question is it safe enough for the people who want to use it? And once you have the non-combustible platforms, vaping, pouches, snus, heated tobacco products, you're into an orders of magnitude lower risk, and you start to say, well, this has to be acceptable in terms of what we're doing. So let's allow these to be made available. Let's regulate them in consumer interests, not in the interests of, or not with the attempt to try and suppress use, but in the interest of protecting consumers. And that will be the long-term sustainable basis for the nicotine industry, recreational nicotine industry, just as we're moving towards a recreational cannabinoid industry. We've had an alcohol industry for many years, with caffeine industry. No one asks in those worlds, is this appropriate for the protection of public health? Of course they don't. It's beer.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the questions that comes up, and I had wanted to ask was, is there a succinct definition of acceptable risk?
It's a good question. I mean, I can't think of anything in which you would you would define that, but you could define it with reference to. I mean, the way we tend to define acceptable levels of risk is with reference to revealed preferences. So I'm being a bit sort of jargonistic here, but you say, well, what are the other levels of risk that we're prepared to tolerate in society for this sort of thing, So what are the other sort of recreational habits that we allow, and what kind of risks come with them? Because they give you a kind of benchmark for what is acceptable. And of course, those risk numbers are all over the place. So things like playing sports, horse riding, you just wouldn't if you knew the numbers. So that's the way you approach these things. And there's a whole discipline about tolerability of risk. What sort of risk do we tolerate? Now it's not always the same, because we have a much lower tolerance for risks that one person inflicts on another. So one person's behavior, if my behavior causes a risk to you, we don't want that risk to be very high at all. Can't ever be zero, but we don't want it to be very high. Risks that we take ourselves, such as base jumping, to think of a particularly risky thing to do, or free rock climbing, horse riding, motorcycle racing. We take enormous personal risks in some ways. So it's not a landscape that's easy to negotiate rationally, because there's no rational starting point in this. But I think you can say we are pretty well entitled to expose ourselves to some to fairly high degrees of risk through our personal behaviors. The one wrinkle in that is that what people say, well, people don't choose these risks. A predatory industry hooks them when they're intellectually vulnerable as teenagers, and then turns them through some sort of, as Carl Phillips would call it, demonic possession, of addiction, into lifelong nicotine slaves or something. Now, I basically just don't believe that model. There's probably an element of truth in it somewhere. Like all good lies, it's got some nugget of truth in there at its heart. But ultimately, people are using these products because they choose to, and they choose not to quit. And they choose not to quit because they're getting something from them, and they don't want to summon up that energy to give up those rewards. And this isn't an uncommon thing. I mean, I could quite happily say I would like to lose 5 kilograms, but I tell you, I'm not addicted to food, but it would be quite an effort to do that. We don't have that much sort of discipline to give up things that we actually like. So, yeah, the addiction thing plays out to some extent, but I don't think it's the main explanation. The main explanation is that people get something from it. When the harm associated with the delivery system is much lower, we should care much less as public health people, I'm saying now, about what they're doing with themselves, because there isn't as much harm for us in public health to fret about.
Yeah, I think, and as far as our first experiences with nicotine or any other drug, I was just sort of reminiscing quietly and thinking back to when I first started smoking cigarettes. I obviously liked the effect of nicotine. I liked to smoke the cigarettes, and I knew, just because of what little education I was exposed to as a child, that if I continued, then I would become dependent or addicted, and it was the idea of addiction was challenging to me. I don't want to say frightening or scary, but I just didn't really want to kind of hand my life over to something that I didn't have any control over. But I really did enjoy smoking and using nicotine, and continued and eventually qualify as addicted to cigarettes for 20 years. But it seems to me that you know, when we talk about drugs to sort of the uninitiated, if you will, the advice is go slow and listen to your body. And that's kind of a degree of education. I think that, you know, teaching young people things like that, and we can just have a separate conversation about, you know, what age that's appropriate at, probably as soon as they're at risk of somebody saying, hey, you want to try these drugs? You know, there's a prevention aspect to this, preventing young people from dying from drugs or alcohol. Alcohol probably is the most immediate threat to young people. In terms of,
well, that's what the numbers show. I mean, by far, and so this actually now increasingly opioids, of course, but yes.
And so this is kind of a long way to get to the question. First of all, I know that you've talked about latent demand in some of the conferences, so this has to do with that. But it's sort of, in an ideal world, the groups that are easily identifiable as prohibitionist groups now, in preparing for what I think is reasonable to expect of a wave of latent demand, not tsunami, but I think a noticeable uptick. In an ideal world where they are actually focused on improving public health, what could groups like Campaign and Truth and all of our body parts groups, what could they be doing to improve the situation?
Well, I mean, they don't want to improve the situation. They want to bathe in the warm glow of a moral panic. That's what they do. That's what brings the money in. That's what gives them prestige. That's what gets them to conferences. It's an outrage and control movement. You have to have outrage and harm, or there's nothing to control, and there's no point to them. You know, if these products become benign, that's it for them. There's no need for them. There's no coffee control. You know, there's no coffee control conferences in Florence, or there's no huge, Johns Hopkins University or Bloomberg endowments for the control of caffeine. And if you get to a position where that nicotine is understood to be a benign drug, because we now have delivery systems of acceptable risk, that's it. It's over for them. And I have to say, I think they're all conflicted. They're conflicted because their livelihoods depend on harm. If there's no harm, there's no point to them. And they never acknowledge that conflict. They never say, well, my professorship of tobacco science actually wouldn't exist if it wasn't for harm. And, it's unsurprising, therefore, that a lot of the academics and activists find that there's a lot of harm. Fancy that, because their livelihoods depend on it. But I think you mentioned latent demand, Alex, and I think this is a really interesting concept, okay, because it's one of these things that we, again, must not get caught into, saying it's only good if total nicotine use is going down. There is an extremely strong theoretical reason why you would expect total nicotine use to go up. And that is this concept of latent demand. So if you imagine smoking, there are characteristics of smoking that form a deterrent to smoking. The most obvious ones being the harm. You're going to get cancer and die early. But there are other things to do with the smell, the mess, the bother. Then there's policy-induced reasons that deter you from using smoking, because that's the purpose of the policies. So high taxes, stigmatizing campaigns, restrictions on where you can do it, warnings designed to gross you out, all that kind of thing. Okay, so those are all deterrents for people who would otherwise use nicotine. They're facing strong deterrent pressure from harms, stigma, policy measures, restrictions, and so on. So if you remove all those, because the harms are very low, there isn't the same antisocial or stigma aspect to vaping, although obviously some will try to create that. There isn't the justification for the policies. The policies were only there to deal with harm, and if there's no harm, there's no justification for the policies to reduce harm. The chances are there's a lot of people who would otherwise have been deterred from using nicotine who would now wish to use it or now find themselves using it because it's a relatively benign thing to do. And therefore, you're not restricted to only those who are prepared to tolerate high levels of risk and the pressure from all the policies and the stigma and all the rest of it. So I think that is quite a large category of people who would never have smoked in the past, but would use nicotine once the harms of smoking are not going to be inflicted on them. And therefore, there is an argument to say that we should expect nicotine use to increase in some, over time. I'm not saying it necessarily will, but it wouldn't be a total surprise if it did, using that sort of economics 101 understanding of when you've removed a bunch of costs, so the demand is going to go up. And therefore, I think we have to be ready and able to discuss that and be willing to say, look, it doesn't matter if more people use this product, particularly if they want to and get something from it. That's a consumer benefit because it's relatively benign. It's not actually causing all these things that we got into tobacco control to deal with in the first place. So people like me got involved in tobacco control because, cancer, heart disease, emphysema, COPD, bronchitis, strokes, all the horrors. If you're not getting those at any appreciable scale, what's the case for being involved? And that to me is where we've got to get to with this. We've got to say, look, this is heading towards a drug that looks like more like something between moderate alcohol consumption and caffeine use than it looks like some, deadly plague, we call the smoking epidemic. And we need to sort of recognize that will have some inevitable consequences in who chooses to use the drug, because the calculus of personal benefit and detriment change when the products are much safer. Oh, excuse me.
I know there was a lot of speculation going kind of into the era we're in now with the legalization of cannabis, that there would be this massive uptick in cannabis use among the population, people who weren't previously using cannabis. But I've read a lot that there's kind of, I guess it's really kind of a blurry image that we're getting right now, because it seems like there's an uptick, but it also is plausible that we're seeing an uptick about people who are just more honest about it because it's legal, as to people who were before saying, no, I didn't use it when it was legal and whatnot. But I agree. I think that there's a latent demand, and I think that we probably would see an uptick. But you would also probably see a similar pattern in people who, like with any drug, would pick up nicotine use and then go on to, like we talked about earlier, say, hey, this doesn't benefit me. I'm not getting any use out of it. I gave it a whirl. I'm moving on with my life. I think all of those things are plausible. I can't wait to see what the future holds and what numbers and stuff we're going to see from, something like this. But yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a latent demand. There's so many deterrents now. You can't spend 20 minutes watching TV without being told that nicotine's going to kill you by puppets on a couch here in America. So,
yeah. Well, I think we should always keep in mind the drugs of the public health elite. Alcohol, caffeine in the morning, and alcohol in the evening. I mean, if you go to a tobacco control conference, it's not like anybody's holding back. I mean, people are knocking back the wine. The people are
sure
all over the place. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not. If you look at the standards by which we judge alcohol, I've got some good friends in public health, and I'm not going to be rude about all of it and all the time. But I was talking to one of the sort of top people in the UK public health community. We're over dinner, and she's saying, well, hopefully, once people have quit smoking, they'll move on and quit vaping. I'm like, we are here both having a glass of red wine. Why do you see abstinence as the optimum end goal when we are both perfectly happily, no one, you know, we don't feel we're doing anything sort of, you know, morally disgraceful, or, you know, we're not doing any kind of outlandish behavior here. We're just having a glass of red wine, but we are consuming a drug, and none of us are campaigning to get us down, you know, to zero alcohol. I mean, there's a few crazies who do that, but for the most part, we're quite happy having a glass of alcohol with our dinner, a glass of wine with our dinner. Why not? So we seem to impose incredibly weird double standards when it comes to the recreational stimulant, particularly in tobacco control, the recreational stimulants that they don't particularly like, compared to the ones that they consume in enormous quantities at tobacco control conferences. I think just need to, every time somebody says something about nicotine, we have to think, well, how do we handle that with drugs, with alcohol? We don't. When somebody brings out a new craft beer, you know, the FDA doesn't pop up and say, is this appropriate for the protection of public health? Of course it doesn't. It's beer. It's not intended to be appropriate for the protection of public health. It's intended to be enjoyable. And, you know, we need to get into that sort of mindset with the safer forms of nicotine. The reason to be involved in the nicotine industry is the harms associated with smoking, not the harms associated with a relatively benign drug.
Sure. Yeah.
I had one more kind of tie-in with cannabis, in that, you know, one of the bigger fights, and forgive me for not having followed this to a T, but I think we're still debating this at the federal level in the United States, getting cannabis descheduled as a Schedule I drug. And what happens when that descheduling occurs is more funding is available for research, and we can actually get into, you know, right now, I'm sure there is some research out there, but when you are reading about a particular strain, you have user-informed attributes to each particular strain. This is uplifting, this will relax you, or whatever. But that's not, we don't really have the science there. So I promise I am tying this to nicotine. As that sort of federal designation changes and we see more research into cannabis, I would hope, or the question here is, do you foresee, as we start having this conversation about nicotine being useful and desirable and used by maybe 20 to 30% of the population, we can actually have more funding for actual research looking at how people can use nicotine to benefit their lives?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to say there. Like, so the first thing, most problems with drugs are not caused by drugs, they're caused by prohibitions. Let's just be clear about that, okay? Most prohibitions are not a barrier to accessing drugs. And one of my favorite statistics from the US Monitoring the Future data is that past 30-day, 12th grade, past 30-day cannabis use in the United States has been at or above 20% for the last 25 years. In other words, at a level that was sufficient to trigger a potty-filling moral panic in the United States when it was vaping, when it was nicotine. Okay, daily use around 5% for the past 25 years. Even though these products have been like basically illegal at federal level and illegal at state level for most of that 25 years, it hasn't been a barrier to people using cannabis at higher levels than the kids were using nicotine, or around the same levels they were using nicotine. So prohibition doesn't really achieve very much, but it does cause a whole lot of harms associated with enforcement, the kind of thing you're mentioning about the way it prevents any sort of scientific studies being done. I mean, one of the reasons EVALI was such a gigantic mess is the stigma, and actually it's not even stigma, it's a material risk with declaring honestly that you've been using THC. Who wants that on your medical record when it can get you in trouble with, the police, an employer, a school, a college. It can stop you getting visas, and get you in trouble with your parents. So it's like, it just distorts everything. But at the same time, we've learned the lessons about prohibition in the illicit drug laws slowly, at a glacially slow pace. We are learning those lessons. We're unlearning them and doing the opposite and moving to a more prohibitionist approach in the tobacco and nicotine field, with de facto bans on flavor, actual bans or de facto bans, actual bans at state level, de facto bans at federal level. We've got low nicotine cigarette regulations and menthol bans on the cigarette side. It's like, come on, who has processed what prohibitions actually mean? They don't always work out exactly what you're intending to achieve. On to the other point you're making, and I think this is really important. There are really two types of regulation and two types of research, and I think this is a useful division to think of in terms of regulation. So the valuable regulation and the things that CASAA members should be in favour of are essentially consumer protection measures. So they're designed to protect you, the consumer, from harm, and they're designed to make sure you get what you pay for, and that if it doesn't work or something goes wrong, you can get your money back. It is as described on the packaging, and basically you have recourse. Okay. Most people would say yes, they would like electrical, thermal, mechanical, and chemical safety. They don't want plutonium swilling around in the liquid. They don't want to get electric shocks, catch fire, have things explode on them. They don't want to get burns, blah blah blah. So there's a whole bunch of regulatory things that a decent regulator could do. FDA, of course, because it has grandiose ideas about regulation, hasn't really done any of the useful things. The idea that we still have battery fires, come on. That is a problem that should have been solved years ago with regulation. So that's good regulation. The bad regulation is where, it's not all bad, but stick with it for a moment, is where you're trying to change behavior to stop people using the product. So you're trying to make it less appealing, or you're trying to make it less effective or less enjoyable to use, or so you're controlling the nicotine levels, or you're banning sort of things that would make good innovations, like the inclusion of salts in nicotine liquids, or you're in some of the ideas they now have, you're trying to limit the flow of nicotine past a certain point in the product, or you're making it harder to breathe, or you have to put more effort in to get the desired hit that you want. Those are things that are designed. They're sort of, the concept is that they're protecting you at the population level, but for the most part they're not really. What they're doing is just making the demand go somewhere else, into black markets, workarounds, DIY type things. So they don't really work, but what they do is they interfere with sort of legitimate commercial commerce and tend to push normal vaping things that people want to do into a much grayer gray market or black market, which is not a desirable thing to do. So that's how I would differentiate. And I would also say that the science is differentiated roughly around similar poles. You get some great science that is done looking, we see a lot of this in the UK, for example. What does it take to help people with mental health conditions stop smoking and take up vaping? What are they afraid of? What do they believe? What is it about the products that doesn't work? What's the economic, at a micro level, what's the economic transaction look like? What happens if you can't afford the cost of a device up front, but overall you'd be much better off if you switched to vaping. You know, those are the sort of interesting questions about how you get something to work, and you know, how you get it to work better. And there's obviously, you've got the research in the companies or how you make better products. Public sector research should be, well, how do you get better products into the hands of people who would otherwise be smoking? And then how do you regulate the industry on a sustainable basis? So that's sort of how I think about it. But a lot of this stuff, you know, flavor bans, nicotine caps, power limits, you know, it's like you're just blundering around in a landscape of consumer behaviors you don't understand, and you'll end up with unintended consequences and workarounds. And that's basically what we're seeing.
Yeah. And I did want to, I guess there's another level, of course, to the regulations in the United States. I'm sure that, you know, other parts of the world, it's not terribly different. But one of the things that we know for sure is, you know, our Tobacco Control Act was negotiated between the antis and the tobacco companies. And I did just really, this is a completely separate article, but I think we've kind of slid into this a little bit. You had written about R.J. Reynolds sending nasty grams to small mom and pop shops and small manufacturers in the United States. And when we had you on almost a year ago, one of the things that you sort of pointed to was the abuse of regulation to gain market advantage. And I don't quite know how to approach this collegially or politely or anything else, but you know, this is a big deal. And a lot of our, you know, some of our members own shops, work in shops for sure. And they've seen these letters. You know, is this simply a matter of a tobacco company being a responsible, regulated industry stakeholder, or are they basically just kind of carrying out the rest of the plan, using the regulations as leverage to gain market share?
I mean, it's a tricky issue here. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to preface everything I say with the blame lies with the FDA for this. Okay, so if you the world from Reynolds is, look, we complied with all the regulation, we spent $1 bazillion getting a PMTA, we've done everything we've been told to do by the FDA. Our investors expect some return on the investment that we've made, yet we're being undercut by products that haven't gone through that process and you know, haven't even tried to go through that process. So in order, you know, fiduciary duty, we have to wade in and make sure that we have the competitive advantage that our investors expect, and we fought tooth and nail to get through FDA. That's the world as they see it, and that's not an unreasonable view. If you're sitting in the headquarters of Reynolds or BAT in London, and you're thinking, well, hang on, we've done all this and we're still getting creamed in the marketplace, and we can't charge a premium for our, you know, appropriate for the protection of public health product. The problem, of course, is that is the, you know, if you like, that is the product of an upstream dysfunctional process, which has done two things: create enormous barriers to entry that only companies like Reynolds can overcome, and no sensible path for market for most of the legitimate businesses that are in the marketplace, serving their customers with the products that they've always served them with, new products that they'd like to serve them with, and which work perfectly well for public health and for consumer preferences. So FDA has so badly distorted this market, you end up with Reynolds having the incentive to do that sort of thing. Now, my take on this is that Reynolds should not be putting its jackboot on the neck of small businesses. It should, if it wants to do something in this space, it should be directing its fire at FDA and talking to FDA about a sensible enforcement regime, given the mess that FDA has created, in which it takes, you know, the judgments here should be with FDA about enforcement, not with Reynolds. It should be them tackling that. It should be like almost a merit order of enforcement. So go after the reckless players. Go after the products that have never even come within sending an application in. Go after the frivolous applications. Do something like that, but don't, for heaven's sake, start trying to restrict the market to only those products that have a PMTA, because that will cause just a total disaster. So my advice to them, if they're listening, hello Reynolds, is focus your formidable fire on FDA and its enforcement practices. Don't focus your formidable fire on tiny little shops trying to make a business by selling life-saving products to customers that they've had for many years, because that's a disgusting thing to do.
Yeah, I know that's a pretty tough needle to thread, I'm sure, for a lot of folks, at the top here, and that was the answer I think we were all looking for.
It's a difficult one because the real argument is don't start from here. Don't get into this appalling mess. Have a pragmatic route to market for several thousand products. I mean, if you look at the markets if you look at the registries that we have in the European Union and UK, you'll find typical market will have 10 to 12,000 products on it. Nobody's more in the larger, I think it's like 40,000 in Germany or something. Nobody's losing their minds over that. There's not some outbreak. We didn't have Ivali. There wasn't some outbreak of awfulness in Europe because there are 40,000 products to choose from. It all works pretty well. They're notified rather than authorized, and then they take action if something goes wrong. It's a workable alternative system. FDA cannot do exactly what we do in the European Union, but it could do more to approximate it if it interpreted its duties under the Tobacco Control Act more rationally. Doesn't mean that would be accepted in states or municipalities, of course, but that would be a start.
Yeah, well, state and municipal legislators, bodies of decision making are laboratories for policy that can be scaled up. So certainly they could be. There is opportunity there. And
I wish that was actually true, Alex, because if they were laboratories, they'd look at the San Francisco flavor ban and say, well, that's it. We're not doing any more flavor bans. So it's not a laboratory in the sense that we understand it, where you experiment with something, you find out what the results are, and then you act accordingly. It's something where you sort of blast through, pointing in one and one only direction and say, look, we've done it here. We now need to do it everywhere else without actually bothering to examine the consequences.
Yeah, well, I would absolutely agree with regard to tobacco, for sure. That has been that line has been abused, but I to tee up perhaps a future conversation with you. I know that as conferences are going on, we're going to eSig Summit next week or 2 weeks from now. And I suspect enforcement has been at the top of a lot of people's panels and panel discussions, agendas, and so on. And so hopefully we may have another opportunity to talk about how to best influence FDA and other regulators about what they can do with enforcement.
Yeah. We've got a bunch of academics and experts who affiliated with Tom Miller, Attorney General, former Attorney General now of Iowa. We've got a big letter. It's our sort of like response to the Regan-Udall evaluation of the Center for Tobacco Products, and we're going to be launching that in that week, and hopefully a lot in the vaping community will find a lot to like when that comes out. So keep your eye out for that. We're hoping to get that into the public domain on the 15th of May, just before the E6 Summit and the FDLI conference, which is the same week in Washington. And I will be in Washington, D.C. for both of those. So I'm looking forward to meeting more American friends at those meetings. But that, I think, I think people will feel that that is a good, if Regan Udall's main finding on FDA was that there was a void where strategy should be. And what we have attempted to do, I think there's 23 people have signed up to this now, is fill that void with a coherent strategy, which is a development of the thing that they brought out in 2017, but I would say was better.
Yeah, for sure. I look forward to reading that on my train ride down to DC.
Yeah.
So,
okay, cool.
So we've kept you about for an hour, and we will ask you to stick around just a little bit longer so we can download all the video from this and make fun clips and so on.
Sure.
And I will keep. First of all, thank you again for coming on the show. And I'm moving swiftly along into the very, very, very brief legislative rundown, which I promise you I'm going to keep to 5 minutes.
Awesome. I'll hit the bumper in just a second. I jotted down something really quick, and I just want to throw it out there. Earlier, Alex, you had mentioned research in drugs, particularly in cannabis, and the decriminalization of cannabis, opening those doors, which has been a huge thing, not only for cannabis, but drugs across the board. Last year or the year before, they did pass as part of, I believe, the federal budget, alongside a number of opening doors to harm reduction, new pathways for cannabis research to be done regardless of the scheduling of cannabis. That was part of that. So those doors have opened, those pathways have opened up immensely, but not to the point of actually where decriminalization would bring us. I wanted to throw that out there because it's not quite like it was even 5 years ago. It's gotten much better, but still we're not quite where we should be. Just to throw that into the mix. But yeah, I'm going to hit the bumper so we can talk about other things.
Still pretty difficult to do population studies, go out and survey people and find out what they're actually doing in practice. But yeah, no, there's definitely some.
I just wanted to mention that, we did get a little bit further in the last few years as far as research being done around cannabis in particular. But I'm going to run this bumper so we can get into some legislation. I don't know if that video was cut short and weird for everybody else, but it was for me. So Alex,
so really quickly, I'm not even going to do the screen share because I want to make sure Clive gets on with his evening. And this is very brief. So the bad news up front, for Vermont and Maine, we have flavor ban legislation that appears to be moving forward. We have our call to action up for Vermont. So if you live in Vermont, go to the Vermont state page. You can find it under Get Involved and look for S18. It has crossed over from the Senate to the House, and I've been checking the tracking every day, and I missed this. There was, it sounds like a committee hearing. Apparently, the only people who knew about it were our street, which is good, fine by me. They tend to be on our side on this one. But if you live in Vermont, definitely could use some contacts with your lawmakers and urge them to oppose the flavor ban. This is like what we've seen in other parts of New England and around the country, an indiscriminate ban on flavors, regardless of FDA authorization. Similar bill in Maine, which I don't think I have a call to action up for yet. This was dropped a week or two ago, LD 1215. And so that is moving forward. What was the third? Louisiana is looking at a tax. It started as a 5 cent per milliliter tax, which for CASAA's purposes is still unacceptable, albeit low. And there is an amendment to raise that to a 30 cent per milliliter tax in Louisiana, of all places. So if you're in Louisiana, take action before this gets any worse and urge your lawmakers to oppose that tax. For the good news to round things out, Cook County, Illinois, I believe is looking at a flavor ban. I'll be working on that to get out early next week. Cook County, of course, it's Illinois, which is, at least the closer you get to Chicago, the more hostile they are tobacco harm reduction. Any involvement anybody in Cook County can provide, that would be great, and we'll get that call to action up early next week. So for the good news, as already mentioned, the flavor ban in New York state budget has been removed. It was Part O. The entire thing was taken out. It had been amended through the process to kind of, it's the usual suspects, of course, the cigarette companies, the cigar makers managed to get things exempted or taken out, leaving vapor to kind of twist in the wind. But there was a lot of engagement from a lot of leaders from the Black community and other, social justice folks in hammering home what we have been discussing here and what we've known for decades, that prohibition is actually causing more harm than it's doing towards reducing use of any product. And so hopefully that sticks in the minds of folks in Albany, but we'll see. This is New York after all. And the last bit of good news, which tends to be a controversial bit, is South Carolina's preemption bill has moved forward. I can't remember if it's on its way to the governor's desk or if it has just passed one of the houses, but this would restrict tobacco regulations to state level. And it would not allow, and I'm not sure how retroactive this is, undoing things like smoking bans at the municipal level, but it would keep it at the state level. And I've mentioned this several times, and I have actually had a hard time finding it. But Carl Phillips actually wrote on his blog many, many years ago about why preemption in tobacco was the best way to go, ideally at the federal level, and not having states impose their own restrictions. It is much better for public health to have something more uniform. And of course, in theory anyway, the Food and Drug Administration has a lot more resources in terms of researching what the policies and policy outcomes should be. This is not something that we find that states and cities have access to. So with that, that's the quick rundown. If you heard your state mentioned, that's what's going on, and be on the lookout for stuff to come out next week. And with that, Logan, do you want to say all the things, and then we can
I get to do the spiel. The other thing I was going to say is, when you talk about preemption or whatever, we've discussed this before, is when we end up with this weird little patchwork, whether it's within a state or states near each other of different regulation here and there and whatever, anti-groups like Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids use that as reasoning to say, well, look, we've done it here, we've done it here, we've done it here. Why don't we just do it across the board? And it just makes that argument, it makes that fight that much more difficult and easier for them to justify moving forward with more bans or larger bans or whatnot and what have you. So yeah, absolutely. Anyways, that's it this week, you guys. We did it. We made it through. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, Replay Crew, to everybody who just tuned in for the whole thing. You guys are fantastic. Thank you, Clive, in particular, for joining us and taking the time out of the day, for helping educate all of us about rethinking nicotine and the potential future that we have here. Thank you just so much for being on the show with us today. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. If you are not yet a member of CASAA, you're just doing everything wrong. You've done everything wrong up to this point in your life. No, I'm just kidding. Head over to CASAA.org, though, and become a member today. It's absolutely free. Check out our testimonies page. We talked about the power of your story, about telling your truth, talking about these products, your personal experience with these products, and how important that is. We have a collection of over 13,000 testimonies on our page, and it's still not nearly enough. So add yours. Go share your story. It's the most powerful thing that we have. On top of that, if you're on Facebook as well, we have state pages available all over Facebook. If you live somewhere within, or part of a territory of the United States, if you're part of America, we have a page for that for you. It's a great way to get involved within your state, within different municipalities within your state. Check out our merch page. Our fantastic president of the board, Danielle Jones, has so many awesome designs. You get to be a walking billboard of tobacco harm reduction. And if you're inclined to donate, that always helps as well. I think we're back in 2 weeks. Same time, same place, as far as I know. I don't know what's on the agenda yet. I don't even know if I'll be here, but we're going to be here in 2 weeks. Same time, same place. I think that's the spiel.
That's the spiel.
Cool. I did it. We did it. You guys. We did it. Go team. Go CASAA. Be excellent to each other. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. We'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody. Oh, I got to do the thing. Normally, Kristen does the thing. I'm not ready. Hang on. I'm going to do it. Bye, everybody.
Very good.